Hashtag the night I sat down at the table that had always been waiting. My name is Paige Mercer. I was 25 years old the night my parents took me to dinner to tell me I was adopted. My mother smiled when she said it. She told me they had only kept me for the benefits, and that now that I was no longer useful to them, they were done. My father didn't say a word. He just slid the paperwork across the white tablecloth like he was completing a transaction he'd been meaning to close for years. They had already filed, already made their cuts clean and legal. I was being erased from their estate before the autrace arrived.
I didn't cry.
I didn't say a single word for almost a full minute. But here is what neither of them knew, what nobody at that front table knew. 6 months before that dinner, I had found my birth family. And that night, I had asked them to come. They were seated 3 tables behind my mother's chair. She just hadn't turned around yet. What happened the moment she finally did, that is the reason I am sitting here 6 years later, telling you any of this. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we tell quiet, true-to-life family stories about boundaries, dignity, and the moment someone finally stopped shrinking to fit a seat they were never truly offered. If you have ever had to earn your place at your own family's table, this one is for you. Drop a comment below, and make sure you subscribe. Let's get into it. Hashtag the restaurant. The restaurant was called Vanterre. I had never been taken there in my life. My mother chose it, and that should have been my first clue. Because Diane Mercer did not spend money on me without a reason printed somewhere on the receipt. She wore the gray cashmere she reserved for funerals and board meetings. My father, Wesley, had booked the table under her name, not mine. I noticed that when the hostess asked who the reservation was for, and he answered before I could open my mouth. There was no banner, no balloon tied to the back of my chair, no cake waiting in some back kitchen with my name piped in blue. For a birthday dinner, the table was strangely bare, and the air between my parents had the careful, rehearsed politeness of people about to read a verdict. I had spent 4 years sitting in rooms exactly like this. I booked tables like this for clients, for signings, for the quiet conversations families have when somebody dies and the money has to move somewhere. I knew the difference between a dinner and a deposition. And this had the temperature of a deposition. So I did what I always do when a room goes cold. I steadied my breathing. I counted the exits. That was when I noticed the small brass number on the table behind us and to the left. Table 9. I held it in my mind without knowing why. The way you note a landmark before you've decided you'll need to find your way back to it. I set my own thing beside my water glass, a thin manila folder, plain and unremarkable. My mother glanced at it and, I think, assumed it was a resume or maybe a greeting card. She had no idea what I had put inside it. Hashtag, what birthdays were in our house. You have to understand what birthdays meant in our house to understand why none of this surprised me. When I was small, my birthday meant 1 candle. Not 1 candle as a tradition, not the way some families light a single tall number as a ritual. 1 candle pressed into a grocery store cupcake my mother bought on the way home and never bothered to refrigerate. I'd watch it sweat on the counter while she finished a phone call. 3 weeks later, my cousin Brett got a rented bounce house and a caterer with little quiches on silver trays, because Brett was my Aunt Renee's son, and Brett was blood. I remember the year I turned 8, asking if I could have a party too. My aunt was over drinking my mother's wine. She answered for her, kindly even. Asterisk, we can only do 1 nice thing a month, honey. Asterisk, that was the lesson. Not the cruelty, the kindness. How warm a voice can sound while it's explaining your size to you.
So, I learned the math.
1 cupcake costs less than a party. A child who asks for less is cheaper than a child who asks for the same. By the time I was 9, I had stopped asking for cake because I could see it made the arithmetic easier for everyone at the table, and being easy felt like the only currency I had. I didn't tell myself it was sad. I told myself it was efficient. That's the thing about growing up useful. You don't notice you've been priced until somebody reads the number out loud. And across that white tablecloth at Vanterre, I could feel my mother getting ready to read it. Hashtag, how I got here. I left that house the week I turned 18 with 2 duffel bags and a community college acceptance letter I had filled out myself. Nobody drove me. I worked nights at a pharmacy counter and took morning classes, then transferred to the state school and finished a paralegal program while waiting tables on weekends. I paid for all of it. I want to be clear about that, not because it makes me special, but because it matters for what came later. Nobody handed me a thing. By 25, I was a paralegal at a trusts and estates firm downtown, and I was good at it. I spent my days inside other people's wealth, organizing what happens to a life after a person can no longer hold on to it. I drafted the boring pages that decide everything: beneficiary designations, distribution schedules, the quiet legal language that controls who eats and who doesn't long after the funeral flowers wilt. I could read a trust the way some people read a face. And the great joke of my life, the one I didn't laugh at for years, was this: I could set a perfect boundary for a total stranger. I could tell a grieving widow exactly what she was owed and exactly what she wasn't. But I could not, for the life of me, ask my own family to want me. The only person I ever truly called was my grandmother. Every Sunday for a clock like clockwork, all through college and after. Nana Ruth. She was the one Mercer who answered the phone like she'd been waiting for it to ring. And it was something Nana once said to me that turned out to be the hinge the whole night swung on. Hashtag Nana Ruth. Ruth Mercer was my father's mother, and she was the only adult in that family who ever made me feel like a person instead of a line item. She had opinions about everything and apologies for nothing. When I was 12 and crying in her kitchen because Brett had told me I wasn't a real Mercer, she put down her dish towel, took my chin in her hand, and said the sentence I carried for the next 13 years. Asterisk, you were chosen, sweetheart. Not collected. Asterisk, then she made me a grilled cheese and let me stay up too late. Nana died when I was 23. 2 years before that dinner, I gave the only eulogy that mentioned her by who she actually was, not just what she left behind. And within a month of her funeral, my parents quietly moved out of their cramped split level and into the larger house on Leiden Road, the one that had been in the family for a long time, the one connected to Nana's name in ways I understood better than they realized. I didn't think much of it then. I was grieving. But there was something she had said to me on one of our last Sundays, her voice thin over the phone, that I had filed away without quite understanding. I made sure she told me. Asterisk, she told me that you'll never have to ask anyone for your own life. Asterisk, I thought she meant it as encouragement. A grandmother telling a granddaughter to be brave. It would be 6 months before that dinner, while I was going through county records for an entirely different reason, that I would learn she had meant it literally. In writing. Notarized. Hashtag the temperature dropped the year before I turned 25. My family started going quiet around me. Not the comfortable kind. Texts that used to come back within an hour took 3 days. My mother stopped looping me into the holiday planning chain, then acted surprised when I showed up to Thanksgiving without a dish nobody had asked me to bring. My Aunt Renee, meanwhile, got louder. She'd started using a word in the family group chat she had never bothered with before. Asterisk blood. Asterisk as in, asterisk this is a blood-only weekend at the lake. Asterisk as in, asterisk the cabin sleeps 8, and we want to keep it to blood this year. Asterisk I understood perfectly. I just didn't have the documents yet to know why the temperature had dropped so suddenly, all at once, in the same season. People don't usually turn cold on a schedule. Families drift, sure. But this wasn't drift. This was coordinated. And the analyst part of my brain kept flagging it, the way you notice 3 unrelated invoices arrive on the same Tuesday and realize they aren't unrelated at all. So when my phone lit up one evening in March with my mother's name and a voice 3 degrees warmer than it had been in a year, I didn't feel flattered. I felt the small cold click of a lock turning somewhere I couldn't see. Honey, she said. She only called me honey when she wanted something. Asterisk, we'd like to take you out. To celebrate 25 properly. The way we never quite managed. Asterisk, every instinct I'd built in 4 years of reading other people's bad news told me the same thing. Asterisk, this is too neat. Asterisk. Hashtag the planning here is what most people get wrong about my mother. They think the cruelty is loud. It isn't. The cruelty is the asterisk planning. Asterisk, the cruelty is a woman who never once managed a birthday cake suddenly reserving a corner table at Banterre and calling it asterisk celebrating you properly. Asterisk when Diane gets generous, it's because a spreadsheet somewhere has told her the generosity will pay for itself. I'd watched it my whole life. I just had never been the line item before. So I said yes, sweetly, the way she taught me. Then I hung up the phone and sat at my kitchen table for a long time doing what I do. I thought about timelines. I thought about the house on Leiden Road. I thought about the word blood showing up in the group chat exactly now, exactly this season. I thought about a sentence my grandmother had said to me on the phone before she died. And I thought about the manila folder already sitting in my work bag, the one I'd assembled 6 months earlier for reasons that had nothing to do with my mother and everything to do with finally knowing where I came from. I didn't call my parents back to ask questions. I didn't warn them I'd been to the county clerk. Instead, I made a few calls of my own. Quiet ones. The kind you make when you've decided you're not going to be ambushed. You're going to be asterisk ready. Asterisk I won't tell you yet who I called. But I'll tell you the rule I live by, the one Nana never said out loud but taught me anyway. When my mother is sweet, someone at the table is about to lose something. I just made sure this time it wouldn't be me. Hashtag the parking lot people assume a story like this is about money. And I understand why. There's a will somewhere, a house, a folder slid across a table. But sitting in my car in the Vanterre parking lot that night, engine off, hands steady on the wheel, the thing I was most afraid of losing had no dollar amount. I was afraid of losing the last idea that I had ever belonged anywhere. Because as cold as that house had been, as transactional as every candle and every casserole, it was still the only origin story I had. They were still technically my parents. And if they cut that thread tonight the way I suspected they had come to cut it, then I would be exactly what Brett had called me at 12. Asterisk, not a real Mercer. Just a girl somebody picked up and put down. Asterisk, that was the wound they were aiming for. And they knew it, because it was the wound they had been pressing on my whole life. What they didn't account for was that the wound had already closed. 6 months can do that if the right people find you. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked across that parking lot with the particular calm of a woman who has already read the last page of a book everyone else still thinks is being written. I wasn't walking into a disownment. I was walking to a goodbye I had already chosen. They just didn't know it yet. Hashtag the verdict. We ordered drinks before anyone said anything true. My mother praised the wine list. My father told a story about parking he had already told in the car. And then, somewhere between the bread and the entree nobody would end up eating, Diane folded her hands and shifted into the voice. I know that voice. It's the one she used the Christmas she returned a gift in front of me and explained, patiently, why it hadn't been practical. We've always done our very best for you, she began. Wesley nodded along, a half second behind her, the way he had nodded behind her for 30 years. Asterisk, we gave you a roof, an education. More than some children ever get. Asterisk, I let her talk. I rested one hand flat on the manila folder beside my plate and watched my father's eyes flick down to it and away. The folder had a label on the tab, typed, just the top edge showing above my fingers. He could see 4 letters of it if he looked. And he looked. I covered the rest with my thumb, not to hide it, just to let him wonder. And I watched the wondering start to work on him. My mother kept going. About sacrifices. About how a child should understand the cost of being raised. I thought about a sweating cupcake and 1 candle, and I said nothing. Then she paused, took a small sip, set the glass down with the precision of a woman reaching a slide she'd rehearsed, and delivered the line the whole evening had been built around. Asterisk, there's something, Paige, that you should have been told a very long time ago. Asterisk, she looked directly at me. Asterisk, you're adopted. Asterisk, she said it the way you'd announce a change to a dinner reservation. Asterisk, we adopted you when you were an infant. You were never biologically ours. I want you to know we never planned to keep this from you forever. Asterisk, she watched my face while she said it, and I understood that she was waiting for the collapse. This was the moment she had built the whole evening around, the corner table, the cashmere, the practiced pauses. All of it engineered to land right here, on the second when her adopted daughter learned she'd been a stranger all along, and broken to pieces Diane could sweep up and walk away from. I'd love to tell you it didn't land. It landed. Some part of a person always braces for the floor to be there. And mine had just been told there was no floor. But I had known this for 6 months, and the only thing my mother actually revealed that night was how little she knew about me. She leaned in, almost gentle, and delivered the sentence I will hear in waiting rooms and quiet kitchens for the rest of my life. Asterisk, we only kept you for the benefits. Asterisk, she smiled when she said it. That was the detail that freed me. Not the cruelty, I had been raised on the cruelty. The asterisk smile. Asterisk, a woman does not smile while delivering the worst news of your life unless she has rehearsed it enough times to start enjoying the choreography. And in that smile, I finally saw the whole shape of it. I hadn't been a daughter who disappointed them. I had been an asset that had finished depreciating. Hashtag the accounting benefits is a clean word for a dirty arrangement. My father, to his discredit, tried to explain it like an accountant defending a tax position. There were assistance payments in the early years, Wesley said, not meeting my eyes. Asterisk, the adoption came with a small monthly subsidy when you were little, but that ran out a long time ago when you were still in grade school. There were tax considerations after that. And there was your grandmother, of course. Asterisk, he didn't say her name like that. He called her Nana with a hesitation that made it clear she was being mentioned as a variable, not a person. He said she'd had certain expectations about family, that adopting me had helped them meet those expectations, and that meeting them had turned out to be, in his careful accountant's word, asterisk, worthwhile for a good many years. Asterisk, I sat very still and let the arithmetic of my childhood rearrange itself into its true equation. The one cupcake. The hand-me-downs from Brett that still had Renee's return tags on them. The way the heat in my room got turned down first. They hadn't been poor. They had been pocketing the difference between what a child costs and what a child generates. And I had been the generator. We invested in you, Wesley said, as though that settled it. As though a child were a rental property with a depreciation curve. My mother, impatient with his bookkeeping, cut to the line underneath all the others. The one the whole evening had been built to deliver. Asterisk, the subsidy has been gone since you were a child, Paige. What came after it ends today. You're 25 now. There's simply nothing further that keeping you up does for us. Asterisk, she said it almost regretfully. The way you'd note that a coupon had expired. Asterisk, now you're not useful. Asterisk, 2 sentences. They had reduced a quarter-century of being their daughter to a line that had stopped producing income. I reached for my water. My hand did not shake. I noticed that it didn't, and I filed it away as a small, surprising gift. Then my father did the thing he had come to do. He reached into the leather portfolio he had brought, the one I had assumed held a birthday card, and slid a thin sheath of papers across the tablecloth until it touched my plate. We've already filed, he said. Asterisk, to formalize things. You won't be in the will. You won't be a beneficiary on anything of ours. We wanted to do this cleanly in person, so there'd be no confusion later. Asterisk, he had rehearsed asterisk cleanly. Asterisk, I could hear the lawyer who had coached him in it. And here is the part one have never been able to make my family understand. The part that turned the entire night without a single word from me. I read the caption on the first page in about 4 seconds. The way I had read 1,000 of them. And I saw immediately what they had done. They had filed against the wrong instrument. They had spent good money cutting me out of an estate that was almost beside the point, while leaving entirely untouched the document that actually decided everything. They didn't know what I knew. They thought the power in that room ran through their own modest will. So that's where they had aimed their expensive little knife. I didn't correct them. You don't tell the other side they've sued the wrong defendant. You let them finish. So I slid the papers back an inch toward the center of the table, neither accepting nor refusing, and I let them keep believing they'd won. Hashtag reinforcements across the table. My Aunt Renee's voice arrived on speakerphone from inside my mother's purse, because of course, she was listening. Because Renee had been the architect of half of this. Blood looks after blood, Paige, she said, warm as a knife in soup. Asterisk, you've always understood that. Asterisk, I didn't cry. Part of me had expected to. Some 12-year-old still living in my chest had been braced for exactly this table since the night Brett told her she wasn't real. But 25-year-old me just took a slow sip of water and set the glass down without a sound. And I watched something cross my mother's face that I had genuinely never seen there before. Asterisk disappointment. Asterisk not at me, at the asterisk performance. Asterisk she had written this scene with a sobbing girl in the lead. The girl wasn't sobbing, and it was ruining her ending. Asterisk aren't you going to say anything? Asterisk she asked. There's an edge to it now. The brittleness of a woman whose script has gone off the rails. I considered the question. I considered everything I could have said, the whole flood of it, 25 years backed up behind one small dam. And then she made the mistake people like her always make. She filled the silence by reaching for the line that had worked the first time, expecting it to work again. We only kept you for the benefits, she repeated. Slower this time, leaning on each word, trying to draw blood she could see. But a sentence loses its teeth the second time you hear it from the same mouth. The first time, it had been a revelation. The second time, it was just a confession and not about me. It told me everything about her and nothing about my worth. I smoothed the napkin in my lap once and let her watch me not break. Behind her, at table 9, I saw a woman with my exact chin turn her head toward our table and go still. Hashtag 2 envelopes to explain what was in my folder. I have to take you back 6 months to the week 2 envelopes arrived and changed the arithmetic of my entire life. The first one I had been waiting for. After Nana died, I had finally registered with the State Adoption Reunion Registry, half certain nothing would come of it. 8 weeks later, a letter arrived in handwriting I didn't recognize, careful and looping, the hand of a woman who had practiced what she wanted to say. It was from Susan Hale. She wrote that she had been 19 when she gave me up, that she had not wanted to, that she had thought about me every March for 25 years, that if I ever wanted to meet her, she would drive any distance, any day, with no expectations. She signed it, and then under her name she wrote one more line. The one I read so many times the paper went soft. Asterisk, I never stopped saving you a seat. Asterisk, the second envelope came 3 days later, and it had nothing to do with Susan. Or so I thought. Our state had only recently opened original birth records to adult adoptees, available once you turned 21 and filed through the same reunion registry. I'd put in my request the week Susan's letter arrived. But while I was in the county system, I did something else. Professional habit, the way a dentist can't help looking at a stranger's teeth. I requested the file on Nana's estate. And there it was. In the distribution schedule of the Ruth Mercer Family Trust, executed 2 years before her death, administered not by my parents, but by a bank, a paragraph that stopped my breath. Asterisk, the caregiver distributions to Wesley and Diane Mercer shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday, whereupon the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Paige. Asterisk, not their estate. Hers. Held by a trustee they couldn't touch. Scheduled to leave their hands forever on the exact date they had chosen for that dinner. 2 envelopes in 1 week. One told me where I had come from. The other told me, in my grandmother's notarized hand, exactly what my parents were about to lose, and exactly why they were suddenly in such a hurry. Hashtag process. Not outrage, I did not call my mother and scream the discovery down the phone. That's not the weapon I had. And it's not the weapon I trust. I've watched too many families lose everything to a satisfying outburst that a lawyer later turns into evidence. What I had was process. So, I used process. I took a personal day, drove the trust documents to an estate's attorney with no connection to my family, and paid her out of my own savings to confirm what I already suspected. The caregiver distributions were legitimate, ongoing, and ending. My parents had been drawing a monthly sum for raising me and living in a house the trust funded for the better part of 2 decades. The remainder on my 25th birthday passed to me through a corporate trustee by the trust's own terms. There was nothing my parents could file, sign, or shred to stop it. Their will was irrelevant to it. Their disownment was theater performed on the wrong stage. My attorney asked if I wanted to notify them. Get ahead of it. Soften the landing. I said no. I said I wanted 3 things in a folder, and that was all, the retainer letter so they'd know I had counsel, the trust's distribution schedule so they'd see the date in black and white, and my original birth certificate with Susan Hale's name in the mother's line, so that when the moment came, the table would understand exactly which family I was choosing to leave and which one I was choosing to keep. I labeled the tab, closed the folder, put it in my bag, and carried it for 6 months like a quiet engine I hadn't turned on yet. The dinner invitation only told me when to turn the key. Hashtag table 9. I met Susan Hale for the first time in a diner halfway between our cities because she didn't want me to have to drive too far. That small consideration undid me more than any speech ever could. She was nervous. She had brought a photo album she kept opening and closing without showing me, like she wasn't sure she'd earned the right yet. She had my chin and my way of going quiet when she felt too much. Over 6 months, we built something carefully, the way you'd repair a bridge while still standing on it. I learned I had a half-brother named Danny, 20 years old, all elbows and questions, who texted memes within a week of meeting me as though I had always been there to receive them. I learned my birth grandmother was a small, ferocious woman named Pearl who took one look at me and said, "Well, there she is," like I had simply been late, not gone for a quarter century. They never asked me for anything. That was the part my whole nervous system couldn't parse. No favors. No money. No role to perform. Susan told me the 3rd time we met the thing that would become the truest line of my life. Asterisk, we've kept a seat for you, sweetheart. We never gave it to anyone else. Asterisk, and I, who could draft a flawless beneficiary clause for a stranger, who knew the precise legal language of belonging, sat in a vinyl booth and did not know what to do with my own hands. Because I had been wanted for the first time by people who got nothing out of wanting me. After 25 years of being useful, I had no idea how to simply be welcome. Hashtag the difference. There is a difference between being needed and being wanted. And I had only ever known one of them. Being needed, I understood completely. Being needed is a job. You show up. You produce. You stay easy. You keep the math simple. And in exchange, you get to keep your seat another quarter. I had been needed my whole life. And I had mistaken the steadiness of it for love. The way you can mistake a long commute for a destination just because you make it every single day. What Susan and Danny and Pearl offered me had no job attached. And that terrified me more than my mother ever had. The first time Susan called just to ask how my week was, with no agenda underneath it, I waited the entire conversation for the catch. When there wasn't one, I had to pull my car over because I couldn't see the road through what was happening in my chest. I kept testing them in small, ungenerous ways I'm not proud of. I'd cancel plans to see if they'd punish me. They didn't. They just said, asterisk, no worries.
Next time.
Asterisk, and meant it. I'd offer to pay for everything, to make myself useful, to earn the seat. Pearl finally took my face in both hands, the way Nana used to, and said, asterisk, you don't have to buy your way in here. We already paid. Asterisk, slowly, over those 6 months, a knot I had carried since I was 9 began, not to vanish, but to loosen. I started to believe, against 25 years of evidence, that a person could simply want me in the room. So when my mother called to invite me to celebrate 25 properly, I already knew where I wanted to spend the evening. I just decided to spend it everywhere at once. Hashtag the call. The night my mother booked Vanterre, I called Susan. And I asked her the question I had been too afraid to ask anyone in my entire life. Asterisk, would you come to my birthday dinner? Asterisk, I explained the whole shape of it. The parents. The suspicions.
The trust.
The speech I could feel coming. I told her I didn't know exactly what they planned to say, but I knew I didn't want to hear it alone. And I knew I no longer wanted to perform the grief they were counting on. Susan didn't hesitate for a single second. Asterisk, what time and where? Should we dress up? Asterisk, then she said something that made me put my hand over my mouth in my kitchen. We'd be honored, she said. Asterisk, to watch you not need them. Asterisk, so I made one more call, this one to Vanterre, and I booked a second table for that same evening. Under my own name. Asterisk, Paige Mercer. Party of 3. Asterisk, table 9, the host told me. Near the back. 3 tables behind the reservation already on the books. A Mercer party of 3 at the front. I almost laughed at the geometry of it. They had no idea they'd be performing my disownment within sight of the family that had spent 25 years saving me a chair. I told Susan and Pearl and Danny to arrive a little after us, to order quietly, to simply be there, and to let me come to them when I was ready. I won't pretend I didn't want them in that room. I did. There's a reason truth lands harder spoken in front of witnesses than mailed in a letter, and I had watched enough confrontations to know that a private one only ever becomes the other side's word against yours. But Susan and Pearl and Danny were never just witnesses to me. And that was the whole difference between what they were doing and what my mother was doing. The folder was how I'd make my parents understand they'd lost. Table 9 was where I'd go to remember I'd won long before they sat down. Hashtag the waiver back at the front table. My mother decided the silence had gone on long enough and moved to close the deal. She produced one more page from the leather portfolio and turned it to face me, uncapping a pen and setting it across the paper like a small gift.
It's just an acknowledgement, she said.
Asterisk that we've informed you, that you understand the situation. Sign it and we can all have a civilized dinner and go our separate ways. Asterisk I read the first paragraph in about 4 seconds. The release language opened exactly the way I typed it 100 times myself. Asterisk the undersigned hereby waives and forever releases any claim, interest, or expectancy. Asterisk and the rest of it did what that language always does. It wasn't an acknowledgement. It was a waiver wearing one. A tidy little document designed to have me agree, on the record, that I had been notified and had no claim, drafted specifically to head off the exact challenge I was in a position to bring. They wanted my signature while I was still bleeding from the reveal, before the shock wore off and I could think. It's a classic move. I had seen grieving people sign away fortunes at kitchen tables because someone slid the pen over at the right wounded moment. My mother was counting on my wound. She didn't know it had a trust attached to it. I left the pen where it lay. My father, across the table, kept glancing at the manila folder. I watched the worry climb up his neck in a slow red tide. Wesley had always been the one who knew where the money actually lived. He had seen the 4 letters on the tab. He was doing the arithmetic now, the same arithmetic I had done 6 months before, and I could tell the answer was beginning to frighten him. Is there? He stopped. Started again. Asterisk, is there something we should know, Paige? Asterisk, I smiled at him. The first real smile of the night. Not yet, I said. Hashtag reinforcements. In person, that was when my Aunt Renee arrived. In person now, with Brett trailing behind her. Both of them feigning the surprise of people who had been waiting in the bar for a text. Paige. What a coincidence, Renee said, pressing a cold cheek to mine. I understood instantly. Diane had summoned reinforcements. My mother liked an audience for her best work, and she especially liked one that would nod along and apply pressure if I got difficult. Renee pulled up a chair without being asked. Brett, 26 and still dressing like his mother bought his clothes, gave me the look I had been getting from him since we were children. The look that said, asterisk, you were always going to end up at the kids' table eventually. Asterisk, Renee got right to it, because subtlety was never her instrument. We just want what's best for the family, she said, laying a manicured hand over my mother's. Asterisk, and families have to make hard choices about who's really part of them. You've always been such a practical girl, Paige. You understand that blood looks after blood. Asterisk, there it was again. That word, the one she'd been seeding into the group chat all year, finally said out loud, at the table it had been built for. I looked at my aunt, who had answered for my mother the day I turned 8, and explained to a child why she wasn't worth a party. And I felt the last thread of obligation in me go slack. These were not people I was losing. These were people I was asterisk setting down. Asterisk, I had carried them a long way, longer than they deserved, and my arms were finally, gloriously tired. Across the table, my father wasn't joining in. He was staring at his hands. Then, while Renee was mid-sentence about the family's wishes, Wesley leaned toward me and said something low. Just for me. Your grandmother loved you, he said quietly under Renee's chatter. He stopped there. For a moment, I saw the whole other version of Wesley Mercer, the one who might have existed if he'd ever once chosen the harder thing over the comfortable one. His eyes were wet. He had loved his mother. I knew that much was true. And some part of him understood that the woman he had loved had built a wall around me with her own money precisely because she didn't trust her son to protect me. That had to be a terrible thing to sit with at a dinner table. I waited. I genuinely waited, because there was a version of that night where my father said the next sentence. The apology. Asterisk, I'm sorry. This is wrong. I won't do this. Asterisk, and I would have heard it, and it would have mattered. But he looked at my mother, who was watching him the way a handler watches a dog that's wandered toward the road, and I watched him choose. He sat back. He picked up his water. And the almost sentence died in his throat, the way so many of his almost sentences had died over the years. That was the closest thing to love anyone at the front table offered me all night. It lasted 4 words and a swallow. I didn't hate him for it. You can't hate a man for being exactly the weight you always knew he was. But I understood, finally, why the evening had been rushed. Why the whole thing had been pulled together in such a hurry. He had known about Nana's trust. He had known the date was coming. And he had hoped, desperately, to get my signature on a waiver before I ever found out what his mother had done for me. So I asked him a question. Not loudly. Not as a daughter. I asked it in the voice I use at the firm when I found the flaw in someone's filing, and I'm giving them the dignity of noticing it themselves.
Dad, I said.
Asterisk, which instrument did you file under? Your estate, or Nana's trust. Asterisk, the table went quiet in a new way. My mother's wineglass paused on its way to her mouth. Renee's manicured hand stopped patting. Wesley blinked at me like I had started speaking a language he half recognized from a country he never visited. Because in 8 words, I had told them 3 things they hadn't budgeted for. That I knew there was a difference between the two. That I knew which one mattered. And that I had known long enough to learn the vocabulary cold. Asterisk, what? Asterisk, my mother said. And it came out smaller than she had intended. Asterisk, what are you talking about? Asterisk, I let the question sit. I've learned that the most powerful person in any room is the one who doesn't need to rush to the answer. I turned my water glass a quarter turn on the cloth, lined it up with the edge of the folder, looked at my father, who had gone very pale, who already knew, who was silently begging me with his eyes not to open it. Then I opened it. Hashtag the folder. I didn't make a show of it. No flourish. No slammed document. No speech. I simply turned the folder so it faced them and laid the 3 pages out on the white cloth, side by side, the way I lay exhibits in front of a client who needs to understand their own situation. The retainer letter, first, firm letterhead, and the unmistakable line confirming that I was represented by counsel. The distribution schedule of the Ruth Mercer Family Trust, second. The relevant paragraph already visible in black and white for anyone at the table to read. And third, my original birth certificate, with Susan Hale's name in the mother's line, where my mother had assumed her own name belonged. I didn't point at anything. I let the paper do the work paper does. My mother's eyes went to the trust schedule first, because of course they did, because some animal part of her had always known where the money slept. I watched her read it. I watched the words go in. Asterisk, the caregiver distributions to Wesley and Diane Mercer shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday, whereupon the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Paige. Asterisk, I watched her reach the word asterisk remainder. Asterisk, I watched her reach the word asterisk Paige. Asterisk, and I watched the color leave her face from the top down, like a window shade being drawn. She looked up at me, then at Wesley, then back at the page. The way people do when they're hoping the second reading will say something kinder than the first. It didn't. It never does. Mom, I said gently because I could afford to be gentle now. Asterisk, you filed against the wrong family. The one you cut me out of was always the smaller one. Asterisk, my mother is a fast woman. Even now, even here, it took her about 10 seconds to assemble the full picture. I watched her do it in real time. The house on Leiden Road, funded by the trust she had assumed she'd live in forever. The monthly distributions that had quietly furnished her comfortable life. And that stopped, by their own terms, tonight. The remainder, the real money, the part she had spent 2 decades adjacent to and never controlling, passing on this exact date to the daughter she had just finished telling she was done with. And the waiver. Her clever little waiver. That I had been seconds from signing. That would have been worth precisely nothing, because it released a claim on an estate that was never where the value lived. She had aimed every weapon she owned at a will, and missed the trust entirely. The cruelty had been free. The mistake had been expensive. Hashtag the pivot, and here is where I learned the last thing my mother had to teach me. People like her never apologize at the moment they're caught. They pivot. Her face rearranged itself in front of me, the cold draining out and a terrible warmth flooding in. She reached across the table for my hand. Paige, she said, and her voice had gone soft and wet and maternal in a way it had never once been when it cost her anything. We're still your parents. Whatever's in those papers, that doesn't change what we are. We're family. The word family. From the mouth that 20 minutes earlier had said, we only kept you for the benefits. I looked at her hand, reaching for mine, and I did not take it. The same sentence that had been her weapon was now, in this light, the confession that cleared me to leave. People expect this is the part where I made them pay, where I detailed exactly what the remainder was worth, watched them squirm, maybe ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, and left them the bill. I understand the appetite for that. I have felt it myself. But I want to tell you the truth about power, because I handle it for a living. The strongest position in any room isn't the one holding the biggest number. It's the one that doesn't need the number at all. I had a career I had built with my own hands. I had savings I had earned waiting tables and drafting documents in the early mornings. I did not need Nana's remainder to be free. And that, more than any dollar figure, was what my mother could not survive understanding. So I closed the folder, gathered the 3 pages back into it, unhurried, and kept the pen they had brought for my surrender, and set it neatly beside her plate. I had won the thing they thought we were fighting over before any of them sat down. I had won it by knowing, by preparing, by refusing to be ambushed. There was nothing left to argue. There was only the choice of where to spend the rest of my birthday. And I had made that choice 6 months ago, in a vinyl diner booth, when a nervous woman with my chin slid a photo album across a table and didn't ask me for a single thing. Standing up I stood. I did it the way you'd rise from any table. No drama. Just a woman pushing her chair back and reaching for her folder. But the effect on the front table was immediate. My mother's hand was still hanging in the air where mine should have been. Sit down, she said, and the soft maternal mask slipped, and the old cold control snapped back into her voice like a bone setting. Sit down, Paige. Where on earth do you think you're going? Renee straightened. Brett stopped smirking for the first time all night. My father just looked tired, the look of a man watching the only good thing his mother ever did walk out of his reach forever. I picked up the folder and held it against my chest. And I looked at my mother, who had spent 25 years and one expensive dinner trying to make me understand that I had no real place anywhere. And I told her where I was going in the plainest words I owned. My birth family is sitting 3 tables behind you. I didn't say it cruelly. I didn't need to. The sentence had been true for the entire meal. True while she smiled and rehearsed and slid her waiver across the cloth. True the whole time she believed she was performing my disownment to a room full of strangers. She hadn't been performing it to strangers. She had been performing it within arm's reach of the people who had been saving me a chair since before she ever decided I'd stopped being useful. I watched the words travel across the table and land. And I watched my mother begin, very slowly, to turn around in her seat. Table 9. She turned the way you turn when some part of you already knows, and is begging the rest of you to be wrong. The cashmere shoulders rotated. Her chin came around. And there, at table 9, 3 tables back, beneath the warm low light of Vanterre, were Susan and Pearl and Danny. They had been there the entire time. They had ordered quietly and eaten almost nothing. They had watched my mother deliver the worst sentences of my life, and they had kept their seats and their composure, because I had asked them to let me come to them. Susan met my mother's eyes first. She didn't glare. She didn't gloat. She just looked, steadily, quietly, at the woman who had raised her daughter on one candle and a calculator. And then she looked at me, and her whole face opened like a window in spring. Pearl had her napkin already folded by her plate. Ready. Danny had stopped pretending to look at his phone. My mother's gaze moved from Susan's chin to mine and back again, doing the resemblance math. And I saw the exact moment she understood. The family she had just told me I didn't have was sitting 15 feet behind her, in real chairs at a real table, having watched her do the one thing she could never take back, in front of witnesses she didn't know she had. She turned back to me. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in my entire life, my mother had no script. And in the silence where her next line should have been, a chair scraped back at table 9. They stood up, all three of them, not to make a scene, not to confront anyone, just to be on their feet when I crossed the room to them, the way you stand for someone arriving at a gate after a very long flight. Pearl stood first, because Pearl does everything first. Then Susan. Then Danny, knocking his knee on the table leg in his hurry. They didn't say a single word to my parents. They didn't have to. Their standing said the entire thing. The restaurant had gone quiet around us, the particular hush of strangers who can feel that something real is happening and have stopped pretending not to watch. A waiter froze mid-step with a tray balanced on his palm. And I walked. Past my mother, still half-turned in her chair. Past Renee, whose mouth had finally run out of the word asterisk blood. Asterisk past my father, who lifted his eyes to me as I passed, and then dropped them again, choosing comfort one last time. 15 feet. 3 tables. 25 years. When I reached them, Pearl took my face in both her hands, the way Nana used to, and Susan pulled out the empty chair beside her own. The 4th chair. The one they had asked the host to set, even though their reservation was for 3. And she said the words she had written under her name in that first letter. The words that had gone soft from my reading them so many times.
We saved you a seat, she said.
Asterisk, we always did. Asterisk, and I sat down in it, in the seat that had been waiting my whole life, at the table that had wanted me before they even knew if I'd ever come. Hashtag the storm. That was when my mother lost the one thing she had never lost in front of people. Her composure. I heard her chair scrape, heard her stand, heard the front table calm. She had worn all evening cracks straight down the middle. After everything we paid for, she said, and it wasn't quiet anymore. It carried across the dining room, sharp and rising. Asterisk, after everything we did for you, the schools, the roof, the years, you do this to us in public? You humiliate your family over money? Asterisk, heads turned openly now. A man at the bar set down his drink. Renee was tugging at my mother's sleeve, hissing. Asterisk, Diane, sit down. People are looking. Asterisk, but my mother was past the reach of her own handler for the first time in her life, because the script was gone. All she had left was the truth, coming out sideways. We gave you everything, she said, to a room full of strangers. I noticed she said, asterisk gave. Asterisk, not asterisk loved. Asterisk, even now, even cornered, even stripped of every prepared line, the word love would not come, because it had never been in the inventory. I stayed in my seat at table 9. I did not stand to match her. I did not raise my voice to meet hers. Susan's hand had found mine under the table, and I just held it and let my mother be loud, because the loudness was doing my work for me. Every person in that restaurant was watching a calm young woman seated quietly with people who clearly adored her, and a furious older woman standing at the front table, shouting about everything she had paid for. There is not a human being alive who hears a parent screaming about money and thinks, asterisk, ah, there's the real family. Asterisk, my father never stood at all. He just put his face in his hands. I let her run out of words the way a storm runs out of rain. Hashtag the last thing I said when the quiet came back. I did one final thing before I gave the rest of my attention to my actual family. I stood, walked the 3 tables back to the front, and set a single page down on the white cloth in front of her. The trust's distribution schedule. Face up. I didn't need it anymore. My attorney had the originals. But I wanted my mother to have something to read on the longest evening of her life. You can keep this one, I said. Asterisk, you'll want to understand what ended today and what didn't. Asterisk, she stared at the page. Wesley reached for it, and then didn't. And I looked at the two of them, my mother, who had priced me at 1 candle, and my father, who had loved his own mother too much to honor what she had asked of him, and I said the only sentence I had written in advance. The one I had composed in the parking lot and decided I would only use if I earned it. You kept me for the benefits, I said. I looked at table 9. Asterisk, they kept a seat for me. Asterisk, then I turned around and walked back. And I did not look behind me again. Not once. Not when Renee called my name. Not when my mother said something I couldn't hear and didn't want to. I sat back down beside Susan. Pearl had ordered me a slice of chocolate cake while I was gone. Danny had stuck the little restaurant candle in it, a single candle lit. For 1 second, the symmetry of it caught in my throat. One candle, the same as it had always been. Except now it was surrounded by people who had put it there on purpose. Susan leaned over and said, Asterisk, blow it out, sweetheart. Make a wish. Asterisk, and I realized I didn't have one. I already had it. Hashtag, what came after the trust did exactly what my grandmother built it to do. On my 25th birthday, the caregiver distributions to Wesley and Diane Mercer ended. On the date, and by the terms Nana had notarized 2 years before she died. The remainder passed to me through the bank trustee, untouched by the will my parents had spent good money revising, because you cannot disinherit someone from a trust you don't control. Their waiver, unsigned, was worth what it was always worth. Within a year, my parents sold the house on Leiden Road. Without the distributions, they couldn't carry it. They moved into something smaller. I am told Renee was furious to learn that none of Nana's money would be flowing toward Brett after all. The story of that dinner traveled the way these stories do, through the family and then past it. The version where Diane Mercer is the devoted mother wronged by an ungrateful adopted daughter never quite took hold, because too many strangers at Van Ter had watched a woman scream about everything she'd paid for while a quiet girl held hands with a family across the room. I didn't sue anyone. I didn't post anything. I simply stopped answering and let the silence be the boundary, which is the only kind that ever truly holds. My father texted me once, a few weeks later. 3 words. Asterisk, I am sorry. Asterisk, no name. No follow-up. When I didn't reply, he never wrote again. I heard later that when Renee tried to rally the family to contest Nana's trust, it was Wesley who quietly shut it down, told them his mother had every right to leave her money where she pleased, that it was hers, that it was finished. He was right. He was also, as ever, a year too late, saying it to the wrong room, when it cost him nothing and changed nothing. That was the whole of my father in the end. A man who knew the right thing, even felt it, and could only ever bring himself to do it once doing it had stopped requiring anything of him. I didn't need the apology, but I was glad in a small, clean way that he had finally been right out loud. Hashtag every birthday since I spent that first real birthday eating chocolate cake at table 9 with people who got nothing from wanting me. And I have spent every birthday since with them. Susan and I talk every Sunday now for a clock, the hour I used to save for Nana. Pearl taught me to make her grilled cheese. Danny still sends memes. And somewhere in a drawer at my new family's kitchen, there is a photo album that doesn't close anymore because it finally has enough pages. Being useful was all my parents ever wanted from me. Being wanted was the one thing I had never had. And it took me 25 years and one terrible dinner to learn that anyone who only keeps you for the benefits has already told you, in the plainest language there is, that they were never your family at all. That's my story. 1 candle for 24 years. And on the 25th, a whole table that lit them all without being asked. Asterisk, if someone in your life only values you when you're useful, take this as your sign to stop auditioning for a seat you already deserve. You don't have to earn the people who truly love you. Asterisk, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Asterisk.